Charley Wu, thanks so much for coming to help us out on the podcast, man. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah, so I was thinking every interview I have is a novel experience. Like every interview I have is a different person, and it's unique in its own way. And it made me think if you've had any novel experiences lately that stand out to you.
Well, I think this is kind of very characteristic of what it's like to be human because almost every situation we're ever in, it's the first time we've ever done it. Almost never do we experience the same situation twice. And I think this is very characteristic for what makes human intelligence so adaptive and flexible. Um, we're hoping to kind of capture some of these with new advances in AI and machine learning, but there's still something very fundamentally unique about the fact that humans can really readily adapt in countlessly novel experiences. And this has been a key part of my research, trying to understand how we do this.
What do you define as a novel experience? What does that word mean? Because for me, I see novel experience as experiencing something completely new. However, obviously, nothing is the same, right? We live in a chaotic world where even when I feel like I'm getting up and going through the same routine in the morning, it's never the same. So technically every experience is novel, but if we ascribe that definition to it, everything's novel, and then in that case, it's really hard to kind of bear down on why these things matter.
Right. So I guess there's novelty in kind of relatively trivial domains. Like maybe there's a slightly more pepper in your soup, or a slight difference in kind of the flavoring. But then there's also kind of like a transformative form of novelty where we don't even have the variables or the categories for the experience, right? And so I think the latter is fundamentally much more interesting, I have to say. And this is something that, again, to kind of be on the side of the humans here again, that we're particularly good at these kind of situations, whereas even kind of modern advances in AI still struggle with kind of adapting to circumstances that are completely outside the boundaries of what
Right.
they've experienced
Yeah.
previously.
I think AI is super interesting, and I have a few questions on that we'll get to later because I'm very very curious as to how AI will adapt to novel experiences. Um, how is those trivial novel experiences handled by the brain differently than a novel experience that's landmark? You know,
Right. So I'm actually currently writing a paper right now where we're looking at how selective memory works. Why do we remember some things and why do we forget others? Like, why do we remember some details and we forget other details? And I
trauma.
think some
It's
of
always trauma, right?
right, but often these kind of trivial novel details are forgotten because they're not really seen as being relevant by the brain. Right, the brain has limited resources; we can't remember everything, and so we're prioritizing kind of what we think are the relevant experiences. But at the same time, there's also the need to kind of factor in the fact that we don't exactly know what's relevant, right? The brain is always learning to understand the world, and what initially seems as being as something irrelevant may actually be relevant later. And this supports the idea that we kind of store these very kind of faithful episodic memories of surprising events. So when we're surprised, there's something kind of outside the category of our past experiences. So kind of these transformative novel experiences, we tend to remember them with a high degree of fidelity because we don't know what is relevant yet for those circumstances. And then later, as we're kind of updating our model of the world, um, things, kind of details from those memories actually play a very important role in trying to figure out, okay, actually these details matter and these details don't because we got it wrong previously.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is, as we have that novel experience, the second time we have that novel experience, we don't remember it as much as the first time that we had it.
Perhaps, right. So I guess, so myself, I'm Canadian. I've been living in Europe for the last decade or so. And some of my first experiences trying to navigate in a foreign country under a foreign language were quite confusing and actually stuck around in my brain for quite long because they were quite, um, there's a lot of experiences that were quite novel there. But then now it's become old hat, and I travel to a dozen countries or so every year. And it's quite straightforward for me to navigate in a country where I don't necessarily speak the native language. And um, actually probably a lot of details about travels are forgotten because they're not seen as being so relevant anymore.
So why don't we just seek novel experiences all the time if they're so memorable and so valuable? Why isn't that just the only thing that we
Well,
try to experience?
Well, a key part of my research actually looks at what's known as the exploration-exploitation trade-off. So all living animals have to face this, right? So on the one hand, we want to explore novel situations to acquire useful information, and this information can maybe help us find better rewards in the future. Maybe help foraging animals or human foragers find better sources of food in the
Yeah,
future,
knowledge is
or
power,
help.
man. Knowledge is power.
Exactly, knowledge is power. But at the same time, we can't only explore. Otherwise, we might starve or fail to kind of satisfy immediate needs. So we also need to exploit what we already know about the environment in order to acquire immediate rewards. And so the exploration exploitation dilemma is how we kind of figure out a balance between these two things.
Is that what we're doing in childhood mainly? Is figuring out
Yes,
how to operate that entire
that's
system of, and humans are unique in this case, right? We're able to look into the future and make a sacrifice now. Like we can sacrifice something now for a future gain. I don't
yeah.
think there's any other
No.
organisms that are able to do that, right? And we learn that in childhood.
Um, okay, this is a very important kind of direction to go in. So I think I have a lot of thoughts about this. I published quite extensively here. You're right that humans are very unique, and this is something that human children are probably aware of, are very curious and explore a lot, right? So children maybe have a different solution to this exploration exploitation trade-off than we do as adults, because the information you gain as a child actually has way more time to pay off. It pays dividends when you're doing this as a child versus when you're older. So this kind of this lifespan rationality that if you're going to invest in exploration, you better do that earlier because there's more time for that to pay off. Now, it's really costly computationally. Like, for instance, we can run our supercomputers for very long periods of time, and we still couldn't figure out exactly how much to explore, exactly how much is optimal. And the brain certainly can't do this. We can't figure this out mathematically. And so what you might think about is that as a child, we kind of have this blanket subsidy for exploration. Just like, for instance, every dollar invested in like basic science research pays off $8 in the long run. But if you try to do accounting for every different project you fund, you're never going to be able to figure out which things pay off, right? So you're just better off having this blanket subsidy for science, for research, right? And because we'll know in the expectation that it pays off. So children also have this. They can't compute exactly what experiences or what types of exploration will pay off the most. So they just have this blanket subsidy for exploration. And this typically tends to decrease over the lifespan.
Man, it's makes you wonder how much smartphones and sitting on your iPads and everything like that is inhibiting that. Basically, kids are A/B testing every day, all day. Do this, don't do that.
Right.
Does this work? Does that not work? And they're just sitting inside on screens, not exploring, not creating the foundation that's going to last them the rest of their life.
Well, the fact that we explore so much allows us to adapt better than other animals to our environment, right? So some animals, for instance, when they're born, they can already walk. They can already do all these types of behavioral
Yeah,
patterns.
giraffes are like up right away. Like that giraffe stands up and he's running around and hanging out with his mom, and our kids are
Exactly,
just
right?
can't even see.
But the advantage is the fact that we're so helpless, is that we put everything into learning, right? And this means that we can adapt really well to new environments that we're in. And our human environment around us has changed so drastically every generation, right, in the past. And so it may seem like quite like bad parenting, and this classic example of the iPad children, but in many ways, it's unavoidable that our new human landscape is pervaded by technology and things like smartphones. And being curious about those things may pay off in the end. Who knows, right? Like I told you, we can't compute what's going to pay off. And so who knows, maybe that kind of curiosity about technology and like things like smartphones will pay off. Of course, that can also run wild, right? Just like, for instance, there's a difference between a healthy appetite and someone who has eating disorder, or these things can go awry. And this type of research that we're doing here on development, by myself and my colleagues, is also maybe able to point towards some of the mechanisms behind why some psychiatric psychiatric conditions arise in the first place. It's due to rational processes that evolution has trained our body to, but sometimes these processes can still kind of sometimes go awry and malfunction.
So there can be physiological, not just environmental challenges to how we learn and obviously, interact with the world, but there's physiological problems that can be in the brain that can keep you from that exploration process, that keep you from functioning in the proper way.
So I think a big part of course, there is a kind of a chemical and physiological aspect to a lot of these psychiatric issues. But my perspective is that the brain is always trying to adapt to environment. And sometimes the childhood environment, right, that we're adapted for, there's a mismatch between the childhood environment and the adult environment. Say, for instance, you're a child raised in a war zone, or you're a child raised in poverty, or has faced a culture shock as an immigrant. These kind of harsh environments as a child maybe encourage you to kind of develop a solution to the exploration-exploitation trade-off that prioritizes too much exploitation, right? If the environment is very inconsistent, very unstable, then you're not going to be incentivized to explore that much because it won't pay off, right? And so in these types of impoverished environments, or a kind of quite, I guess, aversive environments, we may then adapt to those environments in a way that doesn't translate very well to an adult environment that's more stable, where we may be better off with more exploration.
So a lot of times people have, as they get older, I think I don't know what causes it, but they have an inhibition to exploring and doing things. I love to just wing it, man. I love to just send it to the wind and just wing it. And there was as you know, we do a lot of driving and exploring with our cars. And I'll talk to people. They're like, "Oh, I've got to get all my hotels figured out. I've got to get the route that I'm going to take. I got to know where I'm going to eat. I got to pack 3 days ahead. I've got to have 16 toothbrushes, and everything has to be like exactly so before they will even consider a novel experience." Why do people get to the point where when we're kids, we just do it? What gets in the way from just having a freedom experience or like a winged experience that's completely novel, right, without exerting so much control over the situation?
Well, I think partly it's due to the fact that the brain is lazy. It has limited resources and it tries to reuse past solutions in some way that works, right? We're never solving problems completely fresh because that's just way too costly. We're expending way too many resources, and rather what we're trying to
What's
do
a resource? What's a brain resource? What does that mean?
Well, energy, time you spend thinking on a problem,
like
right?
Literal calories we're burning,
but also effort and control, right? Like, would you rather be doing the math, figuring out some problem, or would you rather be scrolling through social media or chilling and watching a movie, right? Often our brains tend to kind of prefer to reuse solutions with some sort of tweak to them, right? Rather than kind of trying to solve it from the ground up. It's very difficult, right? And sometimes we have to kind of force ourselves to do our homework or force ourselves to do some tasks, right? That really require this. So everyone's probably experienced times where they really want to do something or they're really supposed to do something, but they just can't get themselves to do it, right? So there's a limit to how much we can control ourselves in our brain.
And retailer of OE, OEM, genuine aftermarket, and performance parts for European cars. From BMW to Porsche, Volvo, and more, their catalog is a one-stop shop with over 275,000 unique products. And I can tell you from going around the warehouse, I think that's an understatement. 275,000 unique products, including expert assembled kits to make shopping simpler. One of those kits is exactly what we use to change the oil and the differential oil in the Golf R. They are actively building out the VW, Audi, and Porsche catalogs, from current to our favorite classics, including the Mark I Scirocco Freeride car, which is 100% dialed in now. I'm so excited about it. They're working on every part you need for all your cars. Plus, every product they sell is backed by a lifetime replacement guarantee. You can wear items like wiper blades, brake pads, and oil filters which I still cannot fathom. I cannot believe it. With the opening of their distribution center in Mesa, Arizona, FC Bureau is now shipping parts from both coasts, serving most of the country in 3 days or less with a free shipping option. We at Overcrest have been working with FCP Euro for years and can vouch for them. Real people who are passionate about what they do and the cars we love, while making sure they put you, the customer, first. Check them out today at fcpeuro.com and take advantage of free shipping on any order over $49. AC Solutions offers complete plug-and-play air conditioning conversion kits for your classic BMWs, such as the E30, which please let me get this E30 that I'm looking for. Please. I've got one. I've seen it. Really want it. Not just so I can put AC Solutions stuff on there, but it becomes inevitable once I do. They've also got stuff for E28s and E24s and soon to be Porsche, featuring OEM quality components with period correct finishes and materials. Their products are designed as drop-in upgrades to your old factory system, but with the performance of modern technology. Their products stem from hands-on design and development with a deep knowledge and passion for these vehicles. They're designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts and come complete with a full warranty, quality instructions that mirror those of a factory manual. Check out all their offerings at acsolutions.co. acsolutions.co. Yeah, it almost seems like the wing it would be the lazy part, though. Like it would just be the lazy ways to just go do it and not spend so much, maybe it's not time resources, it's just brain resources of trying to figure out all the details of it. Just go do it.
These days, winging it probably doesn't cost you that much, right? The risks are not that high, right? But for most of human history, winging it could mean the difference between life and death, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably true. You can't wing it when you're going to go out hunt for a gazelle so you can feed your family, right? Winging it could mean you get eaten by a lion.
Exactly. Yeah.
And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to get eaten by a lion. So how does this curiosity ensure the continuity of the human race? As we've gone over time, and you recently received a grant to study how culture is kind of aggregated, I think is kind of what I understood of this grant that you've got. How do those two things work together, and how does this curiosity keep humans alive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so I think humans are very unique on Earth for the fact that we are very distinctively cultural animals compared to others. Whales can transmit songs to some degree. Birds also transmit songs. Recently, they also found that honeybees can show other honeybees how to solve problems that no bee alone could ever figure out. So other animals do transmit information, but no one does so in the same way that humans do. Like we build skyscrapers, right? Yeah. The amount of complexity that we can add on with each new generation, right?
Let's face it, we're pretty awesome.
We're
awesome. Humans are awesome. It's absolutely incredible.
And I think this really highlights kind of this key kind of cultural dimension to what makes humans so smart. It's not our brains that makes us smart. It's the fact that we can learn in this cultural way, right? What we can learn within one generation is very limited, right? We are quite clever, right? But it's not just our own cleverness, our own curiosity that has allowed humans to become so successful as a species on Earth. It's the fact that we can do this thing where we can transmit information from one generation to another. And we can, in each new generation, we can kind of recombine and take these solutions that came up in the past, recombine them, add new bits in, and build something far greater and far superior than the sum of the parts. So that's what cultural evolution is.
Does that happen on purpose? Do we choose to do that? Or does that kind of integrate naturally just by osmosis, like cultural osmosis, I guess?
Well, that's kind of
from our parents or their grandparents, and it's just kind of all in this petri dish, and it just continues. The problem, or not the problem, but what I note with this is that a lot of culture does die. A lot of culture does die. It does disappear. It goes away completely, and you never hear about it again unless you look it up in a book or ask ChatGPT about it, right? It's just gone. But some stuff does continue on.
Yeah, so I guess the first question was, what is deliberate? Well, I think that's kind of tricky because evolution has shaped us in some ways. We, for instance, create these very pedagogical environments for children. And as children, we already come to expect pedagogy. So when people show
What's
us things.
pedagogy? I don't. That's a new one for me.
So if you've ever kind of like tried to explain what is the airplane to a child, well, airplane has wings, right? You might say, right? It flies in the air. You don't say airplane has windows, right? It also has windows, but saying that it has windows isn't very
It's not
informative
definitive at
about what
all.
a plane,
Yeah.
right? And so we're really good at kind of saying things to one another that are informative, right? And we're trying to like, I had this thing in my head. I try to shove it into your head as well. I'm doing this via language, and we're really good at this. And because we're really good at this, we're also in these environments where we expect other people to also shove things into our brains. So we only have to go meet them halfway, right? We don't have to work super hard to figure out what's in their brain. With language, we're also kind of like getting a lot of that shoved into our own brains via the words that are coming out into our ears. So this is something that people are very good at. To what extent is deliberative versus like evolved? I think that's not necessarily a well-posed question. Evolution has kind of created us some ways, and then we're deliberate in the way that we ourselves are ourselves. But how we got
How
here.
do we get better at that? How do we get better at that task? Where do we learn that?
I think part of it.
It just seems extremely valuable. Like if I could figure out how to be better at doing that, or if anybody could feel that they could get better at that communication.
Yeah, I mean that's a great
incredibly
question.
valuable.
It's something that I myself I'm learning how to improving on this every day with how I supervise my PhD students or my postdocs, and I think a lot of it is the fact that we can kind of put ourselves in other people's perspectives. We can imagine ourselves as someone else. It's never going to be completely accurate, right? But we can do our best to try to get to someone else's level, and then from that imagine how to communicate to them very well. So there's a whole line of research understanding things like this. Sometimes people talk about in terms of pragmatics. All the language that we use in English typically, or any language, sorry, typically is very pragmatic, right? In the sense that what we're saying doesn't specify with 100% lack of ambiguity what we mean, but we get it because we kind of know the context, and we know that I'm going to be saying things that are as trying to be as informative as possible, and you're going to already expect that, and therefore we're going to be able to communicate much better. And this is a big question in the philosophy of language, like how we're actually able to communicate ideas, because language is
unbelievable, man.
It's so
It is
shallow.
such
and
an
messy,
unbelievable process that we're able
Yeah.
to communicate with each other this way, and that evolution put us in a position to be able to do this. And it almost seems like it's too good to just be science. You know, it's almost too good to just be science that we're
Well,
able to do this.
how old is science? Science, like the scientific method, right? It's maybe a couple hundred years old. So it is a great framework. I'm a scientist today, but I recognize also that for most of human history, we haven't exactly been doing science. There's also some kind of proposals that like babies are also doing things in a science-like way. So, for instance, Alison Gopnik, who won this year's Rumelhart Prize, which in cognitive science is like our version of the Nobel Prize. She's often proposed that children are kind of like little scientists, right? They're trying to run experiments and find out things about the world. And I think she's very correct in that sense. But kind of the stricter definition of science as we have it today, right, is a relatively novel invention. We're just generally just curious and doing things that is consistent with how we perceive science today.
I mean, there's a freedom that comes with curiosity throughout human history. You know, science is new for humans in the way that we know it today. I think that goes along with the fact that we are a far more free society than we used to be. People weren't, I don't think they were free to be curious, or even they're probably too worried if they were going to die or not. But just think of medieval Europe. You didn't have the freedom to be curious. You weren't allowed to be curious. We're very lucky that we have that ability at all.
No, that's certainly very important. Like we have very little danger of being considered a heretic, although these days. But I guess science still sometimes has this tendency to kind of get stuck from time to time in different frameworks. And we need frameworks to understand the world, but all frameworks are wrong, right? But I think science is very nice because we're able to be critical, right? Whereas I think with religion and kind of this type of faith-based approach to seeing the world, right? You couldn't be critical of your own of the current framework that you're in. Whereas I think science we're actually able to be very critical of it. So that's one. vast improvement.
Yeah. So how do you think researchers and scientists should deal with the thing that they discover that's almost unknowable or it's enigmatic or you can't really, it's, I guess the easiest way to say it is you can't put your finger on why. How do you, when you run across this stuff with your studies, how do you deal with that? Do you just kind of push it off to the side and continue with the stuff that you have the framework for? Or how do you bring these new, like just ethereal, unknowable human mind type things in?
That's actually the guiding principle behind the research that I do. It's like finding those things that we don't understand. That's when you know you're going the right direction, right? So one of my favorite Chinese philosophers has a saying that the sage steers by the torch of chaos and doubt. So when you're finding things that don't make sense, that illuminates the fact that we have a gap in understanding, and then I go in that direction. Find new theories, find new models that explain that phenomenon, whereas previous ones aren't able to. That's exactly like a signal for me to go in that direction.
So how often does that happen? I mean, obviously that's a novel experience in itself, right? So how often does that happen? Is it something that happens all the time? Or is it something where it happens and the light bulb goes off and you just speed off in that direction?
I think it happens all the time. Like pretty much every meeting I have with my students, at some point in the meeting, there's some result that doesn't make sense. There's some phenomena that we're a bit puzzled by, where we have to run more simulations, run more tests, maybe run a new experiment to collect new data, right? It happens almost multiple times every day. And this is why I love what I do. I mean, being a scientist is not that glamorous. Your face is not in magazines. You're not. You don't have cheering fans. You don't make that much money. You work very long hours. But kind of this joy of discovery and the fact that no one else in the world really understands, but you've just discovered, and that kind of flash of understanding, that's very precious, I think, and that's kind of what's one of the motivating principles behind what I do. Why
What's
I do
the most special version of that? What over your career, what is the most special moment that you've had in that venue?
I think that's a bit tough to answer right away, because I feel like I don't want to have a single favorite research project or a single favorite finding. I feel that they all expand on different lines of inquiry, and I think to play favorites here would be a bit unfair.
Okay, let me reframe the question. What do you think is most valuable to me as a layman, as a guy that just goes about the world? What you've discovered, what is most valuable to me?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So there's I think about this all the time when writing grants, when I'm trying to give talks to people. But I'm only still kind of figuring out who you are and what would be interesting to you. So maybe we can loop back to this question at the end of this interview, and I'll hopefully have an answer for you now. And this is just another way to kind of justify, get my lazy brain a chance to kind of stumble upon some correct answer to this question later in our discussion, kind of piece together a solution at the end, because this is often what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
These very simple, often seemingly dumb solutions is what our brain uses, but then it's able to accomplish very complex and very sophisticated behaviors, right? So from these simple, seemingly dumb behaviors to the very complex and effective, I think this is something that we're really good at.
How does the dopamine system play into our desire for exploration? I mean, I think dopamine is probably the biggest buzzword of the last couple of years. People are all obsessed with dopamine and how they get it and how they don't get it and how it can be exhausted and how it can be replenished, and you take dopamine vacations and everything like that. I mean, it is everywhere. All you ever hear or see about is dopamine. How does that factor into discovering or choosing to discover novel experiences, exploration?
So,
chasing the
great
high
question.
of discovery, right?
Right. So one of my close collaborators, Peter Dion, who's the Max Planck director of the Biological Cybernetics Institute here in Tübingen, he's actually one of the authors on this paper that discovered that dopamine in our brain is tracking prediction error. So when we expect some reward versus what we actually get, that discrepancy, that predicts to our extent kind of the activity of our dopaminergic neurons in our brain, right? So what dopamine is really doing is trying to predict surprise. It's capturing kind of how much surprise we have based from our predictions to what we actually get. So dopamine is really the currency of learning, right? So that discrepancy between what we expect versus what we get, that's how we update our beliefs about the world, right? So the larger the discrepancy, the more we update our beliefs. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that kind of captures the magnitude of these updates, right?
So not
So when
overrated.
we
Not overrated at all.
not, it plays a key part. It plays a key role in how we learn through our experiences, and it has relationships to a huge host of different disorders, but also healthy functioning of the brain. I think it's been often misinterpreted by media in talking about like these dopamine holidays or whatever. Because essentially, like if you were to kind of sometimes animal researchers do this with mice, where they can kind of knock out dopamine receptors via process, and the mice just won't do anything. If there's no dopamine, the mice will just sit there, right? So dopamine is essential for function. So we don't want to ever get rid of it completely, and it is the unit by which we learn, right? So the more dopamine activity, the greater that we're updating our beliefs. And there's still a large number of open research questions, of course, regarding the goal of the role of dopamine. But as you can imagine, it also has an important role in terms of exploration, right?
There's got to be some sort of refractory period here, because I don't know if that's the right word for it, but when you go and let's say you go on vacation and you explore a place and you see something new, and maybe you see the pyramids, for example, you are going to then use that as a reference point. At least in my opinion, I feel like you use that as a reference point of how grand it was for other experiences that you have. And
Yeah.
are you getting less dopamine if your brain goes into the file cabinet, goes, okay, I'm comparing this to the pyramids I saw. These Stonehenge things aren't as good. And then your body gives you less dopamine, encouraging you to then seek out more grand and whether it's a risky experience or a grand experience. Is that kind of what's happening as you go throughout is that what wanderlust is?
Well, first of all, nothing is more disappointing, right, than when we have really high expectations for something and it fails to deliver, right? But this is not, like you talked about this refractory period, but this is not the role of dopamine. Dopamine is just the figuring out that discrepancy, right? It's our high expectations in the first place that lead to that discrepancy, right? So it's not dopamine itself. Now you're talking about wanderlust, and I think this again has to do with what our expectations are, right? How content we are with our current state versus what we think could be out there. How green the grass is on the other side of the fence. And I think this also relates to a lot of research on foraging. So you're probably familiar with bees trying to figure out which patches of flowers have nectar. Human hunter-gatherer were greatly shaped by this foraging problem. Do we stay in this area to find food, or do we go somewhere else? Right. So a lot of modern human cognition is also shaped by these similar principles. Do we stay or do we go? Right. Here, I know I can get X amount of resources. Do I go somewhere else where I don't know if this something is going to be better or worse? And so there's a lot of research that shaped this and try to figure out this problem of when do we leave? It's sometimes called this giving up problem, right? When do we give up in this current situation and jump to something else? There are some optimal solutions to this problem based on, so one kind of classic solution is known as Charnov's margin of value theorem, which simply says that if we think we're getting less reward than where our average reward is over our past experiences, then we should go. If this is less fun, what we're currently doing now, than on average, the average amount of fun we've had, maybe you should try something else.
That seems very lizard brain, though. That seems kind of counterintuitive to the exploration-exploitation problem, which is we're supposed to maybe be like okay with staying because future us is going to appreciate that. So it seems like we're almost juggling those two problems.
Right. So I think it depends on kind of what environment we're in, right? So in foraging environments, rewards deplete. The more that we stay, the worse the rewards will be in the future, right?
Yep.
So we're going to overexhaust the resources here. So then we have to leave at some point, right? That's true for bees getting nectar. And it's also true for humans, maybe hunting deer or foraging for berries in a certain location, right? At some point, resource will.
Yeah, but we don't do that anymore. So now we're just in this
Nope.
point where it's not critical that we make that decision. Now
Right.
it's a decision based on leisure, right?
Yeah.
Or
And actually
fiscal,
staying,
like our fiscal future. Like how
yeah,
much of our savings are we going to spend? That kind of thing.
right. And it's actually a very different setting. We're actually staying, we're building something, right? The more we stay somewhere, right, doing the same job that we're doing or investing in the same kind of stocks, we're actually building it even higher such that we can get more rewards in the future, right? So that problem has changed quite a lot. And I think then this new dimension that gets added into it is the fact, is the dimension of planning. How much in the future can we plan for, right? Planning is actually something that humans aren't that great at because planning is incredibly costly, right? To imagine
Especially
all
me.
the possible features. Yeah, but I think it's not a bug. It's a feature of human cognition because we simply can't afford to sit on our butts and plan for everything or we'll get nothing done, right? So we do things like we reuse past plans. Like think about your normal commute to work. Do you ever think about how you could shave off more time? No, you at some
Oh
point
yeah.
you figured out that's really just
Yeah, at
execute
some
that,
point
right?
there's the diminishing returns of driving through the parking lot to get around the stoplight, right?
Exactly. And so this again is where this foraging theory comes up. Diminishing returns. That's all about that. So we stopped thinking about that problem. We've moved on from that problem because there's diminishing returns, right? We moved on to other problems. And so that's exactly what foraging theory is telling us. Like if you spend too much time on some problem, we're going to get diminishing returns. So it's better to move on to something else.
If you're looking for the best app for navigating your next adventure, like me, the trooper out there, next year I'm gonna definitely be hitting the trails. Look no further than Onyx Off-Road. With over 750,000 miles of trails, and comprehensive offline maps, you can explore without ever worrying about cell phone service. The app features trail ratings, detailed information, and a discover tool to help find trails near you. OnX Off-Road also includes public and private land boundaries, so you'll always know where you can legally off-road and camp. Plan trips with ease using our route builder and share your adventures with friends. With features like route tracking, waypoint marking, and real-time updates, you're equipped for any challenge. Ready to start your next adventure with confidence? Try OnX Off-Road free for 7 days. That's for everybody. Free for 7 days. Download today and start exploring. Petrolbox is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. And guess what? That's you. Each month, they carefully select items including tools, detailing supplies. I got some wheel cleaner over there. I got a t-shirt over there this month. They got apparel, garage gear, stickers, and publications to be sent right to your doorstep. It's a curated selection of the latest and greatest gear in the industry. There are 2 different levels of subscription to choose from. The Petrolbox Basic costs less than $20 a month, while the Petrolbox Premium, I think that's the one that gets you the shirt, gets you more gear for $39.95 a month. Check them out at mypetrolbox.com. And damn, I don't know how they do it with coming up with a new t-shirt design every month. They do it. You got it. Petrolbox Premium gets you more gear for $39.95 a month. Check them out at mypetrolbox.com and be sure to use the code OVERCREST at checkout to get $6 off your first month. Remember, it doesn't feel like it, but pretty soon you're going to start hearing Mariah Carey in your ear as you walk around the store. Don't buy something in the store. Get a nice gift. Get a Petrolbox for your dad, your wife, whoever loves cars. It's a great gift. So what happens when we're old then and there's no exploring left to do? You know, I feel like the older you get, the less novel experiences you have because you've experienced so many different things. And this is my greatest fear in life, Charlie, is that I'm going to get old and I'm not going to have anything to explore or learn. And I'm not going to be able to become better. And I'm not going to be able to absorb more knowledge. And I will become useless because I'm not gaining knowledge.
I think you're underestimating how much knowledge there is in the world and the diversity of experiences that are possible out there, right? We experience so little in the world that I think it's incredibly unlikely that you'll actually be in the situation. Although what is more likely is that, and this is probably quite common for a lot of people, is that a lack of curiosity has restricted the scope of things that they can see, right? If we're not paying attention to all this diverse experience or to this knowledge, it may seem like we've already experienced everything. But so long as you're open to it, right, and having that curiosity, you're going to be able to experience it. You'll still have new things to learn from and to adapt to. So I think it's a very unlikely scenario if for yourself.
My theory is that, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, which I probably am. I wore my smart shirt today. I got my Fibonacci. This is the smartest shirt I have. This is I'm trying to put my thinking cap on. And my theory is that novel experiences slow time down because your brain has to analyze everything that you're seeing. Everything's new. Your brain has to take it all in. It can't just, for example, go back to this again. When I wake up in the morning, I don't remember, even this morning, I don't remember the process of everything I did when I got up this morning. I don't remember grabbing my glasses. I don't remember drinking the glass of water, putting my underwear on, because it's the same thing I do every single day. I don't remember any of it. So that time is essentially gone, right? It's gone. It's blinked. It's like it never even happened. But when you had novel experiences, your brain is almost forced to take it all in, analyze it all, and do whatever it does to archive that information. It takes way more energy. It's harder, and time slows down. And my theory is that as you get older, you have, for whatever reason, maybe you're less curious, maybe life catches up with you and you get stuck in a routine. You have less and less novel experiences, and time seems to speed up as we get older, based on the theory that I'm explaining. What are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I think you nailed it here. So I'm not an expert in time perception, but I told you previously, I was just, before I joined the call, I'm working on a paper about selective memory, right? How we remember novel and surprising experiences. And so we store that very well. And we also attend to those experiences. So we pay more attention to them. So at least retroactively, because we have so much more kind of memory and attention of those experiences, they'll dilute time, and we'll experience them at least from the future as having taken up more time, right? And slowing time down. And I definitely also subjectively know that in those situations we also experience this in the moment, right? This kind of time dilation. Although I haven't done specifically research on that in that domain of time perception. But I think you nailed it. I mean, like these are exactly the kind of theories we're advancing right now, and seem consistent with the data that we have.
We can't live in those experiences, though. I mean, what percentage of our life is filled with putting our underwear on? Like we can't, like you say, it would demand an incredible amount of energy, and perhaps it would become incredibly less valuable if we were constantly having that wanderlust, novel experiences stuff. So we spend, I mean, God, we must spend 75, 80, 90% of our life in just routine.
Well, I think there needs to be a balance between kind of novelty and surprising situations and consistency, right? If the world is not consistent, we'll never learn enough structure to then be surprised, right? If everything's coming at you in complete incoherency, right? We're never going to have these strong expectations for what's going to happen to actually be surprised in the first place. We'll just be, I have no idea what's happening, right?
Yeah. You got to have contrast. I guess that's what that is, right? That's life. Yeah. That's contrast in life.
Yeah, exactly. So I think paradoxically, by having that stability, by having these kind of rather mundane experiences, we can build up our ability to predict what's going to happen next. And only via that can we be surprised.
Right. So I want to kind of think about phones for a second. Is it possible to have a novel experience on a phone? Because I was reading some statistics, and the average teenager spends 6 to 8 hours a day on a phone, 4 to 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours. Is that considered a novel experience when you see something new on your phone? You see a new story, you see a new reel, you see a new TikTok. Is that treated the same way as going to a new place and seeing it for the first time? Is there any way to have novel experiences in a digital format like that?
I think so. Like, for instance, I got in touch with you via an email that I saw on my phone, right? And this is a relatively novel experience being interviewed for a podcast for me, right? So that got me thinking, like, what am I going to talk about? How am I going to kind of translate my research into something that people, listeners of this podcast, will find interesting? So it's just a medium, right? Of course, the medium that we receive information shapes the message, right? This famous Canadian philosopher, Marshall McLuhan, has this idea that the medium is the message, right? But it's not fully the message. It shapes the message, but the message is also the message, right? People previously were saying that things like typewriters or the printing press was going to ruin how we communicate information, or
how we oppress people. It's going to ruin how people are oppressed. Is what that is.
So I think we love to hate smartphones for the fact that I think often things, it's kind of like the junk food of information mediums, right? In many ways. And I think a lot of times kind of very messages that are often leading to things like misinformation or political polarization, conspiracy theories are being advanced substantially through social media and smartphones. But I think there's nothing inherently bad about them. This is perhaps that, like, we're having this kind of shock as we're moving from one mode of interacting with other people and figuring out who we can trust and what is fact, what is fiction. And we're having this kind of massive shock because we're switching to a completely different regime that we've never experienced before, right? Before, we received news from kind of trusted news sources or through a small number of close friends and a small social circle of people we met every day in our community. And now that community has expanded massively via social media, and anyone now can can transmit news and share news. And so I think a lot of the kind of defense mechanisms and the strategies that we developed culturally, of course, for this kind of older form of communication has failed to adapt very well. And so we're still trying to figure out how to adapt to this new world.
Yeah, I'm thinking shooting film is going to become a little more valuable. Hey, I've got a negative of this shit that happened right here. I've got a negative. It wasn't generated by AI. It wasn't a digital thing. I wonder if that becomes more valuable.
I still shoot film. I have a 35 millimeter camera. I mean, one of the most novel experiences I've had in my life. I did a Trans-Siberian train trip about a decade ago from Shanghai, China, where I was born, through Mongolia and Russia, and then ended up in Berlin at the end. So, I mean, this kind of trip would not be possible today, certainly not with the war right now in Ukraine. But it was a very eye-opening experience where I was able to kind of really put myself in an environment, in cultures that were quite foreign to me, where communication was difficult on the train. Very few people, no one spoke English, but still figuring out how to kind of how to communicate through the language of drinking vodka and making gestures. And it was very informative to me because I think I met a lot of people who had very different kind of perspectives on the world, which really opened up the scope in which I can understand the world. So I really
how has it changed how you do your research, experiencing those different cultures in that way?
I think for me that was also very informative because it really kind of it really solidified the fact that I'm really interested in people. Humans are an endless source of fascination for me. The way that we live life, that way that we kind of solve our problems, the way that we communicate, interact with one another. This is my this is the focus on my research, right? I study humans. I study human learning. I study human decision making. I study human communication and collaboration. And so,
you ever people watch? Do you go people watching ever? You ever just go sit somewhere and watch people?
Sure, all the time. I don't think I deliberately do this in a in a somewhat creepy way. But
I don't think it's creepy, like to go and like sit on like a bench at the train station and just observe human beings.
Yeah,
I think it'd be really interesting.
I love
the diversity of it is.
Yeah. No, I definitely love that. I love traveling for that. Sitting in a cafe in a foreign city and just watching people is actually great source of fascination.
It's very zen too. You know, you can kind of get lost in it, and your brain starts to fly and wander. And so, in returning to the digital thing for a second. So, what are your thoughts on as we, I don't know if you saw, like Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg had a podcast, and they had basically a digital face. And it was, I don't know if you saw this or not, but it was incredible. It was uncanny. And you were wearing the goggles, and the person you're talking to is right in front of your face. And it looks real. It's very, I think they had to go and get scanned in a very complex way to make it happen.
Yeah.
But I think that technology will evolve. Anyway, so I want to think of in terms of a digital world. Have you seen Ready Player One? Are you a movie guy?
I think I saw that on a flight once, but I might have also fallen asleep at part of it because I was very tired. Not to
It's okay.
disparage the movie in any way
It's a
necessarily.
great
I don't
movie.
really
It's a
know.
great movie.
Yeah.
It's super fun. Lots of fun pop culture references. Book 2, not so good. Went off the rails with the pop culture references.
Yeah.
But book 1, very, very good. And it's about basically like a society that has turned almost dystopian in a way as people regress from or digress from their current society and start, bringing themselves into a virtual society where they can experience anything, anytime, however they want, in any way. So it's almost as if you can have any experience you want. And I'm wondering if you think that devalues novel experiences at all, because it is technically a novel experience. If it's in a virtual world and it feels real to my senses, technically it should be a novel experience. But it's the fact that I can have it as much as I want. Does it lower the value of that curiosity?
I think it does because in many ways, like the rarity of an experience is somehow its currency, right? The more rare it's like if everyone could climb Mount Everest, what pride do you have in saying that you climb Mount Everest, right? If things that everyone has done is not that interesting anymore, right? So to have unique experiences, I think there's still something we like to do things that no one has done before, right? And I think this makes sense. Like I talked about this exploration-exploitation dilemma, right? But we also have this at a societal level as well. If everyone's doing the same thing, right, we're not getting new knowledge, we're not advancing as a society, as humankind, right? And so I think we're often encouraged to do things that are unique, right, from other people, to kind of do things that are innovative and one of a kind. And so that drive leads us to diversify, form niches in the world. And this is the key part of, I think, how we as a human species have been so successful at solving all these massive problems and building such complex cultural artifacts like skyscrapers and spaceships and the internet, right? Because we specifically diversify and do this niche building. So I guess of course, this metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is trying to sell he's invested a ton of money into, but hasn't really taken off yet. And I think no matter how rich the kind of virtual world will get, I think there's still a desire to touch grass, to do things that are difficult in the real world, because for the sake of the fact that they're difficult and that they're rare and unique.
Is that realism or is that optimism? Are you being realistic? I feel like that's a little unrealistic. I feel like humans, especially in different parts of society will react different ways to this. I think there's parts of society that will escape. They want to escape.
Yeah.
Maybe their lives aren't very good, and the virtual world is just going to be better, despite the fact that the experiences aren't as rewarding as if they had them in the real world.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think probably the true reality of this is probably more on the side of virtual experiences than I would myself feel comfortable with as someone who at least remember a time before the internet existed. But I think this kind of concept, like doing things that are difficult, right? And that rarity of experiences having currency, I think that's still going to be quite pervasive. So maybe those rare experiences would be someone beating some video game and with some world record speed, or doing getting some celebrity to follow them on social media, right? These are things maybe I attach relatively little value to, but maybe other people attach great value to them, and there's a shift coming, and more virtual experiences like that will have weight.
Is that value scale depending on who it is? Because it's less valuable to you. I mean, is there a value on a societal level that we can ascribe? Okay, as a society, it's worth X, but as a person, it's maybe X to the third to them because they're super into this. But as a societal level, it's really not that valuable. in
right?
terms of advancing the human race.
Well, society never makes decisions. Humans do. Individual humans do, right? And we can't create anything very prescriptive at the societal level. Some things that we can do maybe are like trying to figure out like what types of environments, social environments, do people tend to perform better, collaborate better, and work together more effectively, and try to kind of also translate that to the real world. But these are kind of minor tweaks that we can do, right? Ultimately, like the kind of the momentum and the direction that society is moving in, this is a very kind of powerful piece that very few of us can fully grasp and control. But we all have a role to play in this as individuals. And so I think rather the focus should be on like what are the individual motivations and the individual incentives that lead us to make choices that we make.
Here's another dystopian thought. So I was looking at my phone, and you can turn my iPhone sideways and you hit the goggles button, right? And you can film in the, I don't know, the Apple Glass mode. I don't even know what the thing's called. I think it's ridiculous. It just isn't for me. Maybe I'm just getting old. But you can film everything in like this stereoscopic view where it feels real when you're wearing the Apple goggles or whatever. I feel, and there's a couple marketplaces for it, I did look, where you can have other people's experiences. So imagine wearing these goggles and going skydiving, or wearing these goggles and being at your kid's birthday party. And imagine having that novel experience yourself. And then you're another person reliving other people's novel experiences. How is the brain going to process that? Does it process it in the same way if it's not your experience, but your senses feel that it is, even though it's someone else's novel experience?
Great question. I think this is like it has the flavor of a classic philosophical thought experiment, right? I would say that one of the key differences is the lack of control, right? When you're passively observing these experiences, I think there's some kind of lack of color to it compared to when we have control. And I think when we can actually change the outcomes, I think we're much more invested in it. And I think then kind of the discrepancy between what we predict will happen versus what we actually experience, that discrepancy that dictates how much dopamine activity the brain generates, this is much lessened because we're just a passive observer. So of course we still predict things that other people are experiencing. Like when in a movie, for instance, when like the murderer jumps out with an axe is going to kill one of the actors, you also maybe have this kind of sympathetic kind of sense of, oh, run the other way, right? But it's much lessened compared to when we were actually in that situation. And so I think there's still going to be a gap between our own lived experiences where we have control, where our actions have consequences, and just passively observing someone else.
Imagine this nightmare though.
Yeah.
It's integrated with AI, and you can have this experience that someone else is having, but you can see what your choices and how it would change that memory of that.
I think that's just like a video game. I think you're describing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And people love playing video games. You know, it's people love playing these kind of games where you can very safely explore, right? So a video game or games in general are just an opportunity for us to explore with no risk or consequences, right? And so, of course, we as humans love this kind of experience because we are very, as I said, talking before, we're kind of naturally tuned to try to balance this exploration-exploitation trade-off. But there's very little consequences for exploring there, right? If you're a hunter-gatherer exploring to see if there's food in the other valley there, might lead to death, right? But in a video game, the consequences are much less. Lesser, maybe just
I fear AI in video games. I like the character that's got the pre-written script. It's got the great story. I love video games. So one that I'm playing right now is called Elden Ring. And Elden Ring is I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a grand open world. It's enormous. You ride around on a horse, you complete tasks, fight bosses. And I don't know that I want the characters in the game. We're kind of spiraling out of control here. I don't know that I want the characters in the game to feel real. I don't know that I want that. I think I want that delineation between my real world experience and those digital experiences that I'm having so that I can tell the difference. I want to be able to tell the difference and being really invested in a game because the characters and the AI are so good that they seem real. I don't know, man. That sounds scary to me. I don't know that I want that. I don't know that I would play that game.
So first of all, I want to mention that I was at a conference dinner with a lot of some other cognitive scientists, and they love Elden Ring. I personally am not.
It's so good.
And I'm personally not a fan of it because it's like I think it's a very difficult game where you die repeatedly, and I think that's too close to the scientific experience of submitting papers to journals in science, where often your papers get rejected and it takes a long time to then eventually get them published. So I think it's a bit too close to home for me, and I would like something where the rewards are not so sparse.
Yeah, that game does need an easy mode for sure.
But then
I think AI is going to affect how we explore. Is it going to enhance discovery for us, or will it help us predict too much and dampen the curiosity of looking?
I'm actually preparing a talk on this topic. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I'm going to say. But I think for most of human history, how have we acquired knowledge? Maybe we, like, if you're one of those rare people in human history who could read, you maybe would go to a library. And for most of human history, libraries didn't have indexes. They didn't have search, right? You would maybe ask the librarian and talk to them and acquire information. Now, for the last maybe like a quite narrow band of human history, since the Dewey Index and since Google searches are possible, but before generative AI, getting information was almost always via search, right? And search is kind of like spear phishing. You have to know exactly what you want to search for, to get it, right? So you're getting exactly what you're asking. But for that kind of whole prior part of human history, and also perhaps now with AI, we can kind of engage in more of a dialogue, an interactive dialogue in order to acquire information. We can talk to the librarian, or we can talk to the AI who has digested all of the internet, legally or illegally. That's still, I guess, court case is still pending. And we can interact in dialogue. Whereas, like, maybe if our initial question was ill posed, we can then rephrase it, and that maybe allows us to kind of explore a bit more, right? Rather than kind of more narrowly getting exactly what our Google search query gets us. So, of course, it has its downsides. These AI models hallucinate. They're inconsistent.
And that'll change. That'll get better.
Or potentially worse, though, because the internet is getting now saturated with AI-generated content, such that these models being trained on themselves, like that kind of snake that eats itself, would potentially make it worse. So I'm not too pessimistic in that sense, but it's like it's not always going to get better in that sense, right? But I still think that kind of this kind of shift in the mode in which we acquire information from search to dialogue could potentially change how we explore, and potentially for the better in that sense.
Yeah, I think it can help us. I'm not too cynical on this. I think it can help us skip to the point. You know what I mean? Like, what are we really trying to discover, and how many things are in the way between us and what the end discovery could possibly be, and how much will it speed up our ability to get to the point of our scientific, problem that we're trying.
Do you think science has a point? I guess every like research project has one specific goal, right?
The end goal is understanding the universe, man. I mean, what else? Everything points at that, doesn't it?
I don't think, though, there's a neutral understanding the universe goal. Everything is like, I think, and there's a million ways we can reach that goal, but the path that we take to get there really matters, right? So I think science is something. I think it's like an end in of itself. The journey is the trip, not the destination, right? So I don't think like getting to some neutral view from nowhere answer about what the universe is all about is going to be so useless for us, right? Rather, we need to kind of find new information that's relevant to how we are currently conducting ourselves as humans, and trying to solve the problems of our society right now. The imminent kind of catastrophic crisis of climate change, of inequality in the world, of kind of risk to democratic institutions. These are all problems that we as humans and as society face. And so the questions that we ask the scientists and the answers that we get are always going to be relevant, related to those kind of that perspective, as opposed to it be from nowhere. So I think we're not rushing towards solving a problem, because the questions that we ask and the answers, the most useful answers that we get will always be with respect to where we currently are as a society.
I want to take a second to talk about the Drivers Club. If you love this content, you love hearing me talk to Charley Wu, which was, God, what an incredible interview. If you like this content, and you want to support content like this, overcrestproductions.com/drivers club. You can support this show for $5. I know you're probably driving right now. You're sitting in your car or sitting at your desk and your phone's right there. It's like, I don't know, 5 clicks and you can support this show. We would really, really appreciate it. Special spot for you in the Drivers Club on the Discord as well. Have some conversations there. Everybody's seen the E30 I was talking about. If you're in the Drivers Club, post all kinds of pictures of it. It's kind of where you kind of get the inside line on projects by me. And if Jake ever starts working on anything again and comes back to the podcast, you'll see stuff from him as well. And a little bird told me he is coming back. So I'm really, really excited for that. Plus, there's tons of exclusive content on there already. There's got to be like 20 or 30 exclusive episodes. Plus, it's feel good. Get to support something you love. Like I always say, if you want to support us, understand, it's all good. Find somebody to support. There's a lot of guys out there, a lot of gals out there creating content that we all consume and enjoy. And they need our support. So get out there and do it. overcrestproductions.com/drivers club. Yeah, all those problems are, very pressing. I always wonder if AI at some point will get to a level where we can just ask the AI what the solution is. At what point will it know enough about humans and our past experiences? And of course, I think the most important thing for AI that I don't think we have yet is live real-time observation of the world in the way that we can observe the world. That's not there yet. And I think that might be one of the reasons why it hallucinates so much, is because it doesn't have any real concept of what's going on. It has data, but it can't absorb anything in real time and make any decisions and make any analyzations. So it can't really help us. It is a very complex librarian, as you've kind of alluded to. And obviously machine learning is important too, but until it can observe the world in real time and take it in a way that humans do, I don't think it's that valuable.
Yeah. So I guess just to follow up on that, let me try to figure out how to best post this here. So I just lost my train of thought for a second.
It's okay. Mine rarely boards at the station, so it's okay. It's all good.
Maybe just try to. Yeah.
I was gonna say, let me save you a little bit and just say, what do you think that AI, when it comes to exploration and human understanding, I still feel like, you're talking about the journey of getting to the point where we can understand the universe, which I don't really think is knowable, right? I don't know that. Maybe it is. Maybe we all live in a simulation and there's like a mathematical explanation for all of this. But that journey that we have, what I would like is for AI to help us speed that journey up before humanity is gone, right? Because humanity is going to be gone at some point. It's just the reality of it. I don't know when. Maybe the state of the world is pretty sketchy. It could be anytime. But I would like to think that we've got more time, and hopefully AI can help us speed up that process so we don't have to fumble around and I don't want to call the exploring useless, but if we don't have to do it and we can get to the point, or we can get closer to the point where we can start solving some of these real problems like quantum computing and fusion electricity and all these different things that we need to do. If we can have unlimited energy in the world, that's really going to solve a lot of problems. And if we can somehow, and that is on the journey of understanding the universe in terms of physics and all these different things. And if AI can help us get there and speed it up, I think it does solve a lot of human problems.
Yeah, so I think AI has already rapidly become this very powerful tool for doing science. So I'm currently in this in these German universities. There's this concept of an excellence cluster, and specifically one from how machine learning can provide new perspectives for science. Right. So with machine learning, we can kind of do computations that were really costly to do before. We can build models that for things like how proteins interact with one another that we just simply couldn't do before. Right. How where it's very difficult to get new data. So machine learning has been a very game-changing tool for how we can do science naturally. In terms of helping us explore kind of the space of theories and hypotheses, it also can maybe help in the sense that we as humans often kind of get stuck a little bit. We get stuck in a rut, right? We often get stuck seeing things from the perspective that we're used to seeing it. And like AI hallucinates and has all these issues, but sometimes like that can also be enough for us to shake us out and see things from a different perspective we wouldn't have before in the past. So sometimes, for instance, I'm really bad at coming up with titles for papers, and sometimes I just get AI to suggest a couple. I'll never use the ones that they actually suggest, but sometimes it gets me to consider a different idea that I hadn't considered before, and then that resets me, and then I can find a better solution than I could have previously. So that's certainly a way.
AI capable of exploring? Do you think? Not yet, but do you think it can be something that can explore in the way that humans do? And can AI have a novel experience? And what is the value of that to AI?
So in a very dumb way, yes. So like novel experiences would just be maybe data hasn't seen before, right? Defines very simply. And actually, I specifically use AI models as a way to model human exploration. We quantify how humans explore based on some notion of how much uncertainty we can reduce about. Right.
Am I being too human by saying novel experience? Because you just said it's like, oh, well, it can have a data experience. But that seems more like me putting my underwear on in the morning, right? That seems more like it doesn't really seem like a novel experience in the way that you and I are talking about.
Right. So we're often studying this still in relatively simplistic experiments, right? But I have a track record kind of pushing these towards more complex and real world situations, right? So certainly like we want to move away from this putting an underwear example towards something more transformative, but we still need to find a way to kind of quantify those experiences in a way that we can put into our models, right? That we can run experiments with, where kind of the specifics of that experience can be counterbalanced and controlled for, so that we don't have any confounds in our interpretation of the data when we run this with human participants, right? So we still have to control for them. We had to be good scientists here and control for all these factors. So in the end, we try to capture these rich phenomena, like these transformed experiences that you might have, but try to kind of water them down a bit to the point we can still study them with the rigor that we need to in science.
What's exciting you about the future of your work? What are you looking forward to, and what do you think you're going to be able to discover in the near term?
So you mentioned, for instance, the CRC grant that was recently awarded, and I think a key kind of component of what I hope to do here is try to understand how we can take fragments of different solutions we found to problems we've solved in the past and combine them in new ways to provide kind of a empirical framework to kind of model this, right? So it seems quite trivial for us that we can kind of like make up some new recipe, right? Or kind of come up with some concept like broccoli ice cream that maybe has never existed in the world, right? And if you have some idea of how to make ice cream and how to cook broccoli, you can imagine how to combine these things together, right? But to have a kind of a really formal modeling framework and to kind of describe how humans do this is still something that I'm hoping to make some more contributions to. And I think when we scale this up to the level of cultural evolution, right, where over multiple generations, someone invents a steam engine, the next person then invents combustion engine, right? Takes these concepts, swaps in some new parts, and then all of a sudden we're going to the moon, right? Within a generation from the first powered flight, right? So I'm hoping that a better understanding of how we as individuals kind of take past solutions that we found, recombine them in new ways to solve new problems, how we can kind of take those mechanisms, understanding those mechanisms, and understand how we as humans have become so uniquely successful on the planet Earth.
So one of the things that Overcrest does is explore out on the road, and people taking cars that might not make it probably will break down. So it's a high likelihood that they'll break down in somewhat dangerous environments that, I guess, on a scale of what we do in our regular lives, they're dangerous environments. What are your thoughts on that kind of exploration and how Overcrest works?
Well, we've talked a lot about kind of exploring to get new information about the world. But I guess another aspect of exploration is like trying to understand what we ourselves are capable of, right? We don't know right off the bat what we can do. And of course, what we're capable of is always changing as we push ourselves and as we develop. And so I think maybe a key aspect about why people kind of like to put ourselves in these challenging situations, why we like to climb mountains, why we like to explore these unknown places that no one has ever been before. We want to see what we're capable of, right? And it's only by kind of really threading that needle, right, between success and failure that we're able to find the most information about ourselves, right? And so I think this is why we specifically prioritize and try to find this right at the knife's edge of success and failure, these experiences that are going to tell us the most about ourselves.
Yeah, I think Kennedy said it best is that we go to the moon because it's hard, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do it is because it is difficult. One of our core tenets is toil. You know, a lot of people will consider toil a negative thing, right? I mean, nobody wants to toil at anything. That sounds awful. But the reward for it is always pretty damn good, even if you had hardship. There's no story to be told driving to the grocery store. There's no story to be told hopping in your air conditioned minivan and driving to wherever. You know, there's no story there. The best human stories come from that kind of hardship and overcoming. And it's a core tenet to almost every good story ever told that inspires anybody.
And I think this distinction between toil and triumph is the fact that the experience is unique and rare. So it kind of ties back to what I talked about before, right? Toil, we're just doing the same old thing that countless other people have done. That's why it's not so exciting, even though we are learning about our limits, right? But learning about our limits in something, in a direction, in a dimension that no one else really can do. I think that's really powerful for us because it allows us to kind of explore as a human society, right? That like across individuals, people are then seeking out their niches, finding those triumphs that are right at the knife's edge of their ability, and able to kind of discover new bits of knowledge that we can bring back to the human society, allow us to develop and continue to evolve as a culture in a cultural fashion.
Yeah, I always try to encourage people to do any kind of exploring. We do it with how we do it, but other people could do it in any other way. They could try new foods. They could learn to bake. They've never baked before. They could go out to the grocery store and explore the ovens and then buy the ingredients and get the apron and all these different things that are all this little minutia of all the things it takes to complete a task. That whole thing is an exploration. Um, it doesn't have to be a painful experience either. Like some people enjoy um the suffering a little bit. I think that's something that some people enjoy. Um, it's like type 1 and type 2 fun. I don't know if you've heard of type 1 and type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is when it's fun now, type 2 fun is when it's fun later. You know, when you look back on it. And usually the type 2 fun is going to be a lot more valuable than the type 1 fun.
Yeah, and I think often kind of we get this kind of thrill, exhilaration from like the progress we make in learning, right? Think about like when like the feeling you have like the roller coaster takes off, the kind of acceleration. I
Yeah.
feel like often I had this when I'm learning something new. Like I grew up playing piano and guitar, but then during lockdown, I taught myself how to play drums, and I found that incredibly fascinating. I can very quickly kind of feel that acceleration, right, from learning because I can take some concepts I had from other instruments and kind of apply this to this new instrument. I kind of already knew how to move my hands independently. I already knew things like rhythm to some degree, and I could kind of apply this to learning drums. And so I had a very very kind of rewarding experience based on this kind of acceleration of learning progress.
I think it's critical to the human condition and having satisfaction in your life is to do these kinds of things. I think it's a mandatory thing. You need to find out something like this, whether it's driving or whatever. If you're not, I used to say if you're not exploring, you might as well be dead. And my co-host Jake was like, "Yeah, maybe don't say that anymore. It's kind of harsh." But I kind of still feel that way that if you're not trying to, and like I've said earlier, my greatest fear is that I won't be able to do that anymore. So then the tenant that I've set up for myself, it's almost like a self-fulfilling failure prophecy that if I fail at that, I'm going to die.
No,
That's
not
that's
this. I think
that's a whole nother story.
yeah,
But I'm
but
just
every
saying that I think it's really, really important to the human condition that we continue to try to learn and
yeah.
have that experience that you had with the drums.
But I think everyone has this, right? Everyone is exploring their own inner and external world around them, and I think you're not wrong in a sense, and in that statement, although it sounds controversial. But everyone is exploring until they die, right? Everyone is doing something equivalent. Maybe it doesn't on the surface seem as flashy as like racing through the desert in a rally car, or or easy to communicate, like learning to play drums, but maybe something else. Everyone has their own battles. Everyone has their own kind of thrills of exploration, no matter how trivial, right? And
Is there a value set that you could add to that? Is it more valuable to do the bigger thing to the human mind? Should we be encouraging that?
Very good question, actually. I mean, like, if I was interested, for instance, in financial gain, I would probably be allocating my exploration towards, I figure out the stock market or stuff like that. But I haven't valued that. I have valued kind of some other things. But other people value financial stability, and that's their own right to do so, right? Some people have valued exploring the natural world around them, and they're maybe more prolific hikers or campers than myself. Although I kind of miss the days when I lived in British Columbia in Canada, and I could go out kayaking in the ocean and explore an island that with old growth forest that no one
within 10 minutes of where you live. Yeah, it's very easy.
Yeah. But
there's some sadness there, man. I just read some sadness in your face right there.
Camping in Germany is not the same. But instead, I'm not exploring kind of this kind of the natural wilderness of Canada, but I'm exploring rich cultures around me where I can very easily and quickly go to different countries where there's so much diversity in culture and there's so much depth in those experiences, right?
The scale of the natural world, though, and the contrast that it provides you is humbling. Yeah. It's truly an amazing exploration thing that I think everybody should do in some way. Is the natural world can be very spiritual.
I completely agree. And I guess in the end, I've chosen the human world over the natural world because I still think like the human, like as amazing as the natural world is, put some humans in there, and you'll have way more to explore.
Yeah, man, that sounds awesome. I really enjoyed my conversation with you today.
Well, thank you so much. Me as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. I hope you get out and have a novel experience today. I know it's probably getting late over there, but I hope you have one on the way home. You enjoy it.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much.
Take care of yourself.
All right. Take care.